At 3:38 p.m. on July 7th, 2011, a call came into the Grand Rapids 911 dispatch center. The voice on the other end was calm but compressed, like someone forcing control into their breath. There's blood, 4 people, no movement, 704 Brannell Court. I'm not staying. The line went dead. It was not the type of call dispatchers received often in the quiet residential part of town. Within 6 minutes, 2 patrol units were on the property. It looked undisturbed from the street. Trimmed hedges, no broken glass, both vehicles present, but the front door was slightly open, not wide, not kicked in, just ajar. The responding officers, Jansen and Murtaugh, entered with caution. Standard announcement, weapons drawn. Inside the home, the silence was unnatural, the kind that sits between seconds like a weight. In the living room were 2 bodies, an older man and woman, later identified as Thomas and Rebecca Heron. They had been shot in the head, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. On the coffee table, a set of house keys, beside it a small handbag zipped shut. Nothing appeared stolen, nothing appeared moved. Down the hall, in a back bedroom, officers found the 3rd body, Camry Heron, age 12. She was on the floor next to her bed, a school book still open. She'd been shot once in the back. There were faint abrasions on her palms, likely from a fall, but otherwise no indication of attempted escape. Her backpack was neatly hung on the door. The 4th victim was found in the master bedroom. Jennifer Marie Heron, 29, was lying partially turned on her right side, 2 gunshot wounds to the torso, close range. Powder stippling was visible on her shirt, indicating discharge within 5 feet. There was no blood trail. She hadn't made it far. There was a television playing in the background, still tuned to a home renovation show. A wedding photo on the dresser had been knocked over, possibly during the shooting or before. There were no signs of forced entry. All windows were intact, no jewelry missing, no signs of ransacking. CSU later confirmed no evidence of any physical altercation. 6 shell casings were collected at the scene, all .40 caliber, federal brand. The spread of the casings, found in 3 distinct clusters, suggested the shooter moved methodically, room by room. There was no spray pattern, no panic. Every shot had found its mark. Forensics would later determine that the rounds had been discharged in a tight formation, suggesting familiarity with the weapon and some level of composure. Jennifer's phone was recovered from the kitchen counter. Her last sent message read, "Hey, something weird just happened. I'll tell you later." It had been sent at 1:57 p.m. No response followed. Her phone logs from earlier that morning included 2 texts related to plans with her parents, and one to a friend confirming she'd pick up Camry after work. In the search history of her laptop, investigators found several recent entries: how to enforce custody, Michigan, restraining order, how long to file, and legal protections, ex-partner threats. The searches dated back 2 days. Her email inbox showed correspondence with a legal clinic offering no-cost consultations for domestic safety orders. Jennifer's background was clean. Employed at a local dental clinic, she'd been on a short personal leave that week. No active financial issues, no recent criminal complaints, except one back in November 2010, a report of threats from a former partner. The case had been marked inactive, no arrest, no follow-up. The name on the report was sealed due to privacy provisions. That would change soon. Camry had just completed 6th grade. Her school counselor would later inform police that Camry had confided feeling in between her parents lately. Custody, it turned out, had been an unresolved issue. Jennifer and her ex-partner shared no formal agreement. Visitation was informal, sometimes spontaneous. There had been tension over the child's schooling routines and where she should live full-time, but no recent incidents had been officially recorded. Thomas and Rebecca Heron, both in their early 50s, were longtime residents. No debts, no legal entanglements, no known enemies. They were known in the neighborhood as quiet and helpful. Their daughter had moved back in with them the year prior. bringing Camry with her. According to neighbors, Jennifer had been keeping to herself more in recent weeks. No one reported loud arguments or unfamiliar vehicles. By 4:10 p.m., the home was sealed and secured. Detectives from Grand Rapids Major Crimes Unit were brought in. Crime scene unit completed a sweep by nightfall. Partial fingerprints were lifted from the sliding door leading to the backyard. One smudged, two partial, one full. All were submitted to the state system. No hits returned that night. There was no DNA evidence indicating a break-in or unknown presence. But what stood out to investigators was the complete absence of chaos. It looked like the shooter had been invited in. The initial hypothesis focused on familiarity. Jennifer, or one of the victims, had likely known the assailant and let them inside. There was no indication the family had been caught off guard while asleep or ambushed. That narrowed the timeline significantly. Sometime between 2:30 p.m., when a neighbor last saw Jennifer watering her plants, and 3:15 p.m., when the first sounds described as popping were heard but dismissed as leftover 4th of July fireworks. One witness, a woman walking her dog 2 streets over, recalled hearing what she described as a tight cluster of loud bangs, followed by silence. At 6 p.m., detectives met to brief internally. The consensus was clear. This was not a robbery, not random, not rage. Every indicator pointed toward targeted violence, clean, focused, personal. No sign of hesitation. CSU retrieved the DVR from a doorbell camera 2 houses down. Though no clear view of the front of Jennifer's home was available, one dark-colored SUV was seen slowing at the curb just after 2:30 p.m. Investigators began the process of tracking vehicles matching that profile. By 7 p.m., names were being circulated quietly: ex-partners, known associates, a former co-worker. A name appeared in Jennifer's call log multiple times over the past week, listed only as R. Investigators flagged it, then paused, because that same name, abbreviated, appeared on the November 2010 complaint. Internal files confirmed that the subject in question had been charged in a separate domestic incident 5 years earlier, served 18 months, and was released in 2009. No current address, no active warrant. The press had not yet been notified. Officers were advised to keep the perimeter quiet. Officially, no suspect had been named. Unofficially, a pattern was emerging, the kind that didn't stop at one address. At 4:52 p.m., less than 90 minutes after the initial response to Brinell Court, another 911 call was received. The dispatcher flagged it immediately due to overlapping details: multiple gunshots, multiple victims, residential address, caller disconnected before units could arrive. The location was Northeast Grand Rapids, Delaney Avenue. Different part of the city, different victims, same pattern. Responding officers arrived at the Emkins residence at 4:59 p.m. Front door was kicked inward. The living room showed signs of disarray, unlike the precision and silence of the Brinell scene. One victim, a young woman later identified as Kimberly Emkins, was found near the staircase with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest and 1 to the upper shoulder. No signs of movement after impact. She likely died instantly. In the kitchen, Amanda Emkins, Kimberly's older sister, had been shot once in the head. She was seated at the table, a coffee cup knocked over, frozen mid-action. No signs of defensive wounds. A child's backpack lay at her feet. The third victim, Marissa Emkins, 10 years old, was found in the hallway between the living room and the back door. 1 round to the torso, 1 exit wound through the lower back. She had likely tried to run. The scene confirmed it. 1 sneaker half on, 1 hand still outstretched. Unlike the earlier crime scene, this location exhibited elements of escalation, disruption, scattered personal items, a chair overturned. Officers found signs of forced entry and resistance. This was no longer controlled. It was rushed, loud, still targeted. The trajectory analysis confirmed 9 shots fired, all from a single .40 caliber weapon. Casing count matched. Shells were recovered in all 3 rooms. Ballistics would later match these to the rounds found at the Brunel address. There was no suppressor used. Neighbors had heard the shots but believed it was a domestic dispute. None approached until the police had arrived. Crime scene unit documented the spatial sequence. Based on blood pooling and wound positioning, investigators reconstructed the likely timeline. Kimberly was shot first, Amanda second within seconds, Marissa last. It was a progression, not a frenzy. Inside Kimberly's purse, CSU found her unlocked cell phone. The last opened app was a messaging thread with a contact listed only as J. The final message was time-stamped 4:42 p.m. He just showed up, WTF. No further texts were sent. Amanda's laptop, located on the kitchen counter, had an open browser tab with Google Maps directions to Brinell Court, Jennifer Heron's address. The page had not been refreshed since 2:19 p.m. The family knew the first victims. That link was no longer hypothetical. Kimberly Emkins had been previously employed at a local gym. She had no criminal record, no known disputes. She had briefly been in a relationship with a man she met at a training course, but neighbors reported she had ended it a few months prior due to mood issues. That relationship had never been formalized in police reports. Amanda, a single mother, worked from home and had primary custody of Marissa. No known threats, no history of domestic violence in the home. By 5:30 p.m., command had linked both crime scenes through ballistics, victim connection, and digital evidence. A working theory began to take shape. Both households contained women with a past or current connection to the same male individual. Both involved close range execution style shootings. Both involved children. All were female victims. The tactical concern now shifted. This was not an isolated act. This was a sequence, a pattern, and the perpetrator was mobile. At 5:57 p.m., surveillance footage retrieved from a neighbor's Ring camera on Delaney Avenue showed a dark SUV idling briefly in front of the Emkins home. The timestamp, 4:39 p.m. A man exited the vehicle wearing dark jeans and a gray t-shirt. The image was grainy, partial profile, not yet definitive. However, comparison to previous suspect references began narrowing identification. Forensic teams submitted a bolo for a 2003 Chevy Suburban, dark green Michigan plates registered under a suspended name, but known to be operated by a former domestic partner of Jennifer Heron. That vehicle had not yet been located. At 6:21 p.m., the local FBI field office was officially notified. GRPD Major Crimes requested technical support for digital tracking and coordinated vehicle search. The offender was no longer operating within a single radius. His targets were known, his movement deliberate, and his behavior, based on the second crime scene, was unraveling. Inside Marissa's bedroom, officers found a drawing pinned to the wall, 3 stick figures labeled Me, Mom, and Kimmy. Nothing notable except that a 4th figure had been added recently in red crayon. No label, just a blank face and crossed arms. Outside, as darkness approached, command made a strategic call. Media blackout was no longer sustainable. At 7 p.m., the department released a general safety alert to the public, multiple connected homicides under active investigation. Citizens were urged to report any sightings of a green Suburban and avoid direct engagement. By 7:15 p.m., the case was officially declared a multi-victim spree. No suspect was publicly named, but internally the list had narrowed to 1. By 8:03 p.m., July 7th, Grand Rapids authorities confirmed a serial trajectory. 2 crime scenes, 7 dead, all shot with the same caliber weapon, all with personal links to the same cluster of individuals. The suspect had not contacted police, not issued threats, not left behind any formal manifesto, but his path was readable. His actions were sequential. He wasn't done. Command operation shifted into phase 2. Locate the vehicle, intercept the subject. The green Chevy Suburban was now the focal point of every patrol unit within the metro area. Traffic cameras were pulled, border alerts were sent, nearby jurisdictions were looped into the manhunt, air support was requested, but sunset complicated visibility. Ground units were advised to maintain distance if the suspect was located. Approach was to be tactical, not confrontational. The shooter had demonstrated discipline under stress. That fact altered protocol. At 8:27 p.m., a license plate recognition hit came through from a camera near Franklin Avenue SE. The Suburban had passed through at 7:49 p.m. heading westbound. Officers responding to that grid began canvassing surrounding streets. One eyewitness, a retired mail carrier, stated he saw a green SUV driving slow, like looking for something. The time, roughly 7:55 p.m., the direction toward Burton Heights. At 8:41 p.m., another call came in. This time it wasn't a body, it was a shooting. Two individuals, a man and a woman, reported being fired upon from a moving vehicle. They had been parked on the side of the road off Hall Street, SE. Multiple rounds struck the front windshield and passenger door. The shooter didn't stop. No apparent motive. The car was not connected to any known victim. The incident was random. No fatalities, only superficial injuries, but it confirmed what the crime scenes had not. The shooter was now unstructured. Officers recovered shell casings from the street. Ballistics confirmed same caliber, same brand, .40 caliber federal, consistent with the first 7 murders. No shell casing was ejected from the passenger side, confirming the shooter had fired from behind the wheel. The vehicle was in motion. Targeting was inconsistent, suggesting urgency, not planning, a shift from personal to indiscriminate violence. Behavioral analysts from the FBI joined the command team at 9:15 p.m. Their profile was preliminary but direct. The suspect was operating under a stress fracture. He was experiencing an acute psychological break, likely accelerated by substance use and internal delusion. The order and precision of the earlier killings suggested preparation. The random attack indicated deterioration. Authorities reviewed GPS logs from traffic control nodes across the southeast quadrant. Several neighborhoods matched the paving of a vehicle traveling erratically but not speeding. No traffic stops had been initiated, which was flagged for review. Officers were instructed to avoid contact unless coordinated. At this point, the suspect was considered highly volatile. A forensic analyst began comparing the timing of known events. Brynell murders occurred between 2:30 and 3 p.m. Emkins homicides followed between 4:30 and 4:45 p.m. The Hall Street shooting was just before 8 p.m. That left a 2.5-hour gap between events 2 and 3. Investigators reviewed unreported 911 hangups, welfare calls, and suspicious activity logs in that time frame. Nothing immediately stood out. Digital forensics turned to cell tower triangulation. A warrant was issued for the suspect's known number. Records were pulled. The device had pinged off towers near the Emkins home at 4:40 p.m., then dropped off grid until 7:41 p.m., when it briefly connected to a tower along Kalamazoo Avenue before going silent again. The pattern suggested a shutdown or deliberate airplane mode use. Analysts noted the device had also pinged a tower near a known associate's residence around 3:20 p.m. during the gap. That location was added to the priority list. At 9:43 p.m., officers spotted the Suburban parked irregularly near Jefferson Avenue SE, windows tinted, no movement inside. Tactical units moved into position. A slow encirclement. Thermal imaging confirmed a single occupant stationary in the driver's seat. The engine was running. Command chose to wait. Negotiation protocol was prepared. A call-out began. No response. Officers initiated contact using loudspeakers. No reply. After 7 minutes of no movement, a low-impact flashbang was deployed near the passenger side. No reaction. A decision was made to approach. When the door was opened, the driver's seat was empty. The vehicle had been running on cruise idle. Inside the center console, officers found a receipt for a gas station purchase time-stamped at 8:14 p.m. The camera footage from that station showed the suspect refueling alone. No interaction, no speech. He paid in cash. This discovery confirmed two things. The suspect had abandoned the Suburban within the last 30 minutes, and he was now on foot. Canines were deployed. A small backpack was found 100 yards east of the vehicle, containing a half-empty bottle of energy drink, a pair of gloves, and a handwritten list with 5 names. 2 of them were already deceased, the other 3 unknown to investigators. The backpack also contained a small, blood-streaked paper napkin with no fingerprints. 1 name was underlined. No context provided. DNA analysis was ordered. At 10:14 p.m., police radio received a separate report from the East Down District. A homeowner had called to report a confused-looking man had walked into his front yard and asked for someone named K. When told no one by that name lived there, the man walked away without comment. The homeowner described the man as sweating heavily and talking to himself. Officers arrived 7 minutes later, but the area was already quiet. The man was gone. Search expanded to include alleyways, backyards, and bus stations. Nothing found. The emotional structure of the case had officially broken. The initial targets had been connected. The victims understood, but this phase was different, unfiltered, dangerous. What the suspect did next would take the investigation in an unexpected direction. At 10:37 p.m., July 7th, Grand Rapids Dispatch received a call from a woman at a residential home on Rickman Avenue, NE. Her voice was hushed, uneven. She reported that a man had forced his way into her home, demanded everyone remain quiet, and claimed he had a gun. There were 3 people inside: the caller, her daughter, and her elderly father. The caller stayed on the line as long as she could before the suspect took her phone. The address was just under 1 mile from where the abandoned Suburban had been recovered less than an hour earlier. Law enforcement immediately elevated the threat level. SWAT was mobilized. The perimeter was secured. Lights were cut on the street. Negotiation command was established 3 houses down. By 10:51 p.m., audio surveillance was initiated from outside the home. Initial voice pattern confirmed a male subject matching previous behavioral descriptors. He was pacing. His speech was loud, disjointed, occasionally confrontational. He was not yelling. He was not calm. The tone oscillated. Based on dialogue captured from within the home, he did not appear to know the hostages personally. By 11:05 p.m., authorities confirmed the hostage taker matched the physical description and recent activity pattern of the suspect, tied to the previous 2 crime scenes and drive-by shooting. Positive ID was not yet public, but internally, no other active subjects fit the profile. Negotiators attempted contact via bullhorn. No response. A second attempt was made by dropping a preloaded phone at the porch entry. The device remained untouched. For 23 minutes, no outgoing calls were made. Tactical strategy shifted from contact to containment. Inside the residence, the mother and daughter, names withheld from public release, remained in the kitchen under passive threat. The elderly father had limited mobility and remained seated in a recliner in the living room. The suspect made no physical threats, but did state multiple times that no one was leaving. He mentioned the name K several times. The family reported they had no relative or acquaintance by that name. At 11:29 p.m., the hostage taker requested a can of soda and a cigarette. Command granted the request in exchange for proof the hostages were unharmed. In response, the man directed the mother to wave through the window with both hands visible. She complied. SWAT noted no visible injuries. Tactical psychologists at the scene reviewed audio logs from earlier in the day. They concluded the suspect was in a late-stage manic depressive cycle, likely amplified by stimulant use. His speech contained obsessive loops, misdirected statements, and identity confusion. Terms used repeatedly included "she took her," "they lied," and "no one's fixing it." When asked for clarification by the hostage mother, the suspect reportedly became silent for over 5 minutes. At 12:12 a.m. Friday, July 8th, the suspect began speaking more clearly, asking for someone by name who was later confirmed to be a deceased individual from the first crime scene. He was not yet aware of the public release regarding the deaths. Law enforcement opted not to inform him. At 12:38 a.m., the suspect allowed the elderly man to use the bathroom. He was escorted and then returned to the living room. No weapons were displayed. No firearm had yet been seen by the hostages, but the suspect claimed to have one and had reached into his waistband multiple times. Negotiators began cycling trained voice operators every 30 minutes to reduce stress fatigue. One negotiator succeeded in keeping the suspect engaged in low conflict dialogue for 8 minutes. The subject began making indirect statements about not wanting to finish like this and no point in going to jail if they're all already gone. Tactical Command saw this as a potential turning point. Psychological operations advised against introducing relatives or emotional appeals, stating the subject was too volatile for emotional leverage. At 1:04 a.m., a fourth audio sweep of the residents picked up irregular pacing and muffled crying. The daughter, believed to be around age 14, had been moved into another room. The mother was instructed not to move. The suspect's tone had changed. Rapid shifts in volume, repetition of names, SWAT Titan staging. At 1:27 a.m., the suspect returned to the main room and initiated a short conversation with the mother. She asked, "Do you want to leave this house alive?" The suspect reportedly responded, "I'm not the one dying tonight." No further elaboration. A decision was made to prepare breach entry, contingent upon risk escalation or weapons display. At 1:58 a.m., a single gunshot was heard from inside the residence. It was unclear whether anyone was hit. Entry was initiated at 2:01 a.m. SWAT entered through rear and side access simultaneously. No resistance encountered. The suspect was found in the upstairs hallway, unarmed, seated, with a single self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Death was confirmed on scene at 2:04 a.m. The weapon, a Glock 22, was found on the floor approximately 2 feet from the body. All hostages were unharmed. None reported physical assault. Medical personnel evaluated the mother and daughter for shock. The elderly father remained stable but was transported for precautionary observation. Inside the home, CSU collected several items. A crumpled photo of a woman and child, later confirmed to be from the Heron family, was in the suspect's pocket. A notepad with a partial address and a torn letter referencing a custody dispute were found in his jacket. Forensic comparison of the Glock to recovered casings at all prior scenes confirmed direct match. The firearm had been purchased illegally in 2009, traced to a straw buyer who had since been incarcerated for unrelated charges. Toxicology reports on the deceased suspect would later confirm the presence of cocaine, methamphetamine, and alcohol in high levels. His criminal record included multiple domestic violence incidents, mental health referrals, and a history of non-compliance with psychiatric treatment. The standoff lasted over 3 hours. No law enforcement personnel were injured. No shots were fired by police. No bystanders were harmed. By sunrise on July 8th, the active phase of the Grand Rapids homicide spree had ended. 7 civilians were confirmed dead. 2 additional victims survived a targeted drive-by attack. 3 hostages were rescued unharmed after a 3-hour standoff. The suspect was deceased. Self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The weapon matched ballistic evidence across all crime scenes. Operationally, the incident was closed. Investigatively, it was far from over. Law enforcement shifted from containment to reconstruction. A full incident timeline was ordered. Investigators from GRPD, the Michigan State Police, and federal behavioral analysts were assigned to build a comprehensive case chronology covering the suspect's movements, digital communications, psychiatric history, and documented threats leading up to the events of July 7th. The subject was identified as Roderick Shante Dantzler, 34, born and raised in Grand Rapids. His criminal history was extensive, including multiple convictions for assault, unlawful firearm possession, domestic violence, and property damage. His last incarceration ended in late 2009. Records showed three separate protection orders filed by different women between 2004 and 2010. None resulted in prosecution due to retracted statements or insufficient corroborating evidence. Dantzler had been referred to outpatient psychiatric care in 2010 after a court-mandated evaluation following a domestic dispute. A clinical report dated March 2010 listed diagnoses of bipolar disorder and intermittent explosive disorder. He was prescribed mood stabilizers and scheduled for biweekly counseling. Progress report stopped in November 2010. The clinic later confirmed he had missed 4 consecutive appointments, after which his case was administratively closed. Toxicology results from the autopsy confirmed high levels of cocaine, methamphetamine, and alcohol in Dantzler's system at the time of death. These substances are known to exacerbate manic phases and reduce impulse control in individuals with bipolar disorder. According to the final pathology report, Dantzler had not eaten in at least 24 hours, indicating physical and mental deterioration consistent with psychostimulant binging. Forensic analysis of Dantzler's phone showed a series of deleted text threads and unsent draft messages. Technicians recovered fragments referencing custody, betrayal, and unnamed targets. Metadata placed the phone at or near the locations of all 7 homicides. The earliest ping near Jennifer Heron's residence was logged at 2:22 p.m. The final tower contact before shutdown was recorded at 7:41 p.m. near Easttown. Additional data retrieved from a second device found in the glove compartment of the Suburban, a prepaid burner phone, suggested attempted contact with an unidentified female listed only as M. No calls were connected. Investigators determined the number had been inactive since March. The relevance of the contact remains unclear. A handwritten list found in the suspect's backpack included 5 names, 2 of which were confirmed deceased. The remaining 3 were eventually matched to individuals who had once lived in the same apartment complex as Dantzler. None had current ties to him. Interviews confirmed Dantzler had not contacted them in over 2 years. Behavioral analysts concluded the list represented a distorted personal vendetta, not grounded in real-time conflict. Officers also obtained surveillance footage from a local convenience store, time-stamped 1:37 p.m. on July 7th, approximately 1 hour before the first killings. Dantzler is seen purchasing cigarettes and energy drinks. He does not speak to anyone. He does not display aggression. His demeanor, while focused, gives no outward indicators of imminent violence. The final piece of evidence tying Dantzler to premeditated planning came from a note found in the glove box of the Suburban. Written in shaky, uneven print on the back of a flyer, the note read, "I gave them everything. She took it all away. They won't do this to me again." Lab results confirmed the handwriting matched prior samples collected from a court-ordered anger management class in 2008. During case debrief, representatives from local mental health services acknowledged that Dantzler's case file had been flagged for follow-up in late 2010 but was never reassigned due to staffing shortages. Furthermore, the family court system had no documented joint custody agreement for Camry Heron. Custody arrangements had remained informal, verbal, and unenforceable. A full administrative review was initiated. Agencies that had encountered Dantzler in the previous 5 years, law enforcement, family court, mental health services, probation, had each handled their roles procedurally but in isolation. No single warning triggered escalation. No central database flagged the totality of risk. Systemic fragmentation allowed a dangerous, untreated subject to remain embedded in public life without coordinated supervision. The forensic interviews with surviving relatives of Jennifer Heron and Kimberly Emkins confirmed a consistent pattern. Dantzler had reappeared in both women's lives sporadically after their relationships ended, sometimes with vague threats, other times with appeals to talk one last time. In both cases, the women chose not to file new police reports. They feared escalation. They were already accustomed to silence over confrontation. The youngest victim, Marissa Emkins, had never met Dantzler. Her death underscored the indiscriminate turn in the spree's latter phase. What began as a revenge path against intimate connections spiraled into broader violence. The profile conclusion stated the shift was not an accident, it was inevitable. An internal GRPD report later summarized the spree in blunt terms. This was not a failure of response. It was a failure of recognition. We didn't miss the signs. We just never connected them. By 7 a.m. on July 8th, local news affiliates began publishing the full list of victims confirmed in the Grand Rapids shootings. The names appeared in black text across screens, headlines, and police briefings. Jennifer Heron, 29. Camry Heron, 12. Thomas and Rebecca Heron, both in their 50s. Kimberly Emkins, 23. Amanda Emkins, 27, Marissa Emkins, 10, all shot, all deceased. The total number of dead stood at 7. One suspect, dead by suicide. Public reaction was immediate. Local schools issued grief response statements. Places of worship opened for drop-in support. Mental health hotlines were activated. A community candlelight vigil was scheduled for that same night at Anab Awan Park. Over 500 people attended despite minimal publicity. The victims' photographs were displayed on a board constructed by volunteers. A counselor from Camry Heron's middle school delivered a brief, factual speech. This is not a story about one man. This is a story about a system that forgot to listen. Media coverage expanded rapidly. National outlets circulated the story by late morning, placing it within the broader context of mass violence with domestic origins. Analysts categorized the incident as a hybrid between targeted family homicide and a public threat event. Law enforcement labeled it a contained spree, given the defined endpoint and closed loop of victims. But for the families, the closure was procedural only. The first funerals began the following week. A joint service was held for Jennifer and Camry Heron on July 12th. Attendance exceeded capacity. Investigators remained outside the chapel, both to assist the family and to monitor for any follow-up threats, though none were expected. Inside, no law enforcement statements were given. This was not a moment for analysis. It was documentation. The family did not speak publicly. Kimberly and Amanda Emkins were buried together per their family's wishes. Marissa was laid to rest nearby. Her school issued a statement confirming counselors would be available through the remainder of the summer session. Several classmates had been interviewed during the investigation, as Marissa had reportedly drawn pictures in class referencing a scary man outside mom's window. The teacher had dismissed it as imagination. No formal reports were filed. In the days following, survivors of prior domestic violence cases involving Roderick Dantzler came forward to clarify their past. One woman under protected identity provided police with a timeline of repeated violations of her prior restraining order. She had not spoken out earlier due to fear of retaliation. Her case had been archived in 2008 after she relocated to a different county. Another former acquaintance submitted a voicemail message from Dantzler dated 2010 that contained indirect threats. The message had been deleted but recovered by digital forensics. Neither woman had reported further contact. A notable moment occurred on July 15th when the City Commission held a public session addressing both the investigation and the wider implications. Speakers included clergy, victim advocates, a retired judge, and one of the hostage survivors. The latter, speaking without revealing her identity, stated, "The man who entered my home was broken before he ever stepped on my porch. I don't blame officers. I don't even blame the system. I blame the silence." From a law enforcement perspective, no immediate policy changes were enacted, but interagency coordination was reviewed. An internal memo circulated among GRPD investigators highlighted a lack of centralized behavioral threat assessment for individuals with overlapping records in the family court, criminal justice, and mental health systems. While each agency had documentation, no unified dashboard existed. A proposed solution was drafted but not yet implemented. The hostage family received short term relocation and private psychological services coordinated through a victims advocacy fund. No members of that household spoke to media. Police confirmed they were not part of any litigation. Their cooperation had been instrumental in verifying Dantzler's condition and state of mind during his final hours. A unique detail emerged from the medical examiner's secondary analysis. Though Dantzler had ingested multiple substances, the presence of lithium, a mood stabilizer, was notably absent. It had been prescribed in 2010. This confirmed that for at least the past year, he had not been adhering to treatment protocols. A review of pharmacy records showed his last filled prescription was 14 months before the murders. During this period, several questions circulated in public forums, none sensationalized but structured around real institutional gaps. Why had no one tracked his non-compliance with psychiatric directives? Why was there no enforcement of custody documentation? And why had multiple women with prior complaints against Dantzler been dismissed without follow-up? GRPD's community liaison officer held a press briefing on July 17th to outline action items. A proposed domestic violence task force would include forensic social workers, legal aids, and digital record integration between courts and clinics. The officer emphasized that these were long-term initiatives and no retroactive justice was possible. The goal was mitigation, not erasure. Across Michigan, regional police departments began reviewing their own tracking methods for restraining orders and psychiatric deferrals. Some agencies adopted short-term flagging systems for repeat non-compliance. Other counties reissued reminders to licensed clinics about mandatory reporting responsibilities. The impact was measured, not sweeping. By late July, the incident had faded from national headlines, replaced by other stories, but in Grand Rapids, the names stayed visible on prayer cards and school murals and mental health grant proposals. A foundation was established by community leaders called Camry's Voice, aimed at identifying risk signs in blended family custody cases involving untreated mental illness and prior violence. One counselor who had briefly worked with Dantzler in 2010 spoke privately to case reviewers. Her statement read, "He was functional, verbal, presentable, but none of that mattered. What we didn't have was continuity. We only saw pieces. Pieces don't save lives." In the months following the July 2011 murders, multiple parallel investigations were initiated. The Grand Rapids Police Department, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and an external review board commissioned by the State Attorney General's office began a coordinated audit. The purpose was not to recount what had occurred. The facts were already well established, but to document where and why opportunities to intervene had failed. The findings were conclusive, not speculative. The first signal occurred in late 2009, following Roderick Dantzler's release from incarceration. He was placed on conditional release with mandatory outpatient psychiatric supervision tied to his documented bipolar diagnosis. For the first 6 months, Dantzler attended scheduled sessions and filled prescriptions for lithium and carbamazepine. But by mid-2010, compliance declined. His final medication refill was in May. He ceased all psychiatric appointments by July. No court officer was notified. Under Michigan law at the time, mental health clinics had no binding obligation to report treatment noncompliance unless it involved an active threat. Dantzler's case fell between the cracks. In November 2010, Jennifer Heron submitted a complaint for harassment. Her affidavit detailed threatening phone calls and unannounced visits to her home by Dantzler. She also noted concern for her daughter's safety. However, no formal restraining order was granted. The case was marked informational only and closed within 72 hours. The assigned officer had no authority to escalate the matter without corroborating physical evidence. No follow-up was conducted. During the same period, the Family Division of the Circuit Court handled a motion involving the custodial status of Kamria Heron. No formal custody agreement existed. Testimony from a family court clerk later confirmed that Jennifer had inquired about filing for full legal custody, but had not returned with the required documentation. Because no court-ordered arrangement was in place, there was no mechanism to restrict or monitor Dantzler's access to his daughter. His name was not flagged in any shared interagency database. Separately, two other women with prior protection orders against Dantzler had made police reports in different counties. Neither case resulted in criminal charges. One report, filed in 2007, detailed property destruction and stalking, but was dropped after the victim declined to appear at the hearing. The other involved verbal threats, but lacked a recording or witness. No record of either case was forwarded to a centralized risk database. These missed signals were not isolated. The audit revealed that 5 agencies, local law enforcement, family court, community mental health services, probation supervision, and medical clinics, had all interacted with Dantzler in the 5 years preceding the murders. None of them had communicated with one another. No integrated alert system existed. In response to the report, the city of Grand Rapids announced a policy overhaul. A new risk coordination task force was created in early 2012, comprising detectives, forensic psychologists, social workers, and court liaisons. Its mission was to identify high-risk individuals with overlapping histories of violence, untreated mental illness, and access to vulnerable populations. Within the first year, the task force flagged 46 such individuals for coordinated review. On a state level, Michigan passed legislation requiring that all protection orders, regardless of adjudication outcome, be entered into a searchable law enforcement network accessible across jurisdictions. Another statute introduced mandated reporting of psychiatric treatment termination when linked to court diversion cases. Clinics were now required to inform supervising officers within 5 days of final missed contact. These were incremental reforms, but the directives were binding. Nationally, the case was referenced during congressional testimony on family violence and mass casualty prevention. The emphasis was not on firearms or spontaneous rage, but on data disconnection, where mental health systems, family law, and criminal justice fail to share information in time to prevent cascading violence. The final investigative report, released in December 2011, detailed the full timeline of July 7th. From Dantzler's departure at 1 p.m. to his suicide at approximately 2 a.m. the next morning, the report reconstructed each movement, interaction, and confirmed killing. The ballistic match across all 7 fatalities, the digital trail connecting cell tower pings, the gas station footage, and the handwriting sample all pointed to premeditation. But more importantly, the report emphasized what the public had already begun to understand. This event was not random. The term mental snap did not appear once in the 84-page document. Instead, investigators used the term compounding institutional failure. Dantzler's psychological instability was real, but it had been documented. His history of violence was known. His access to victims was unregulated. No single action would have guaranteed prevention, but the combined absence of action guaranteed the result. One line in the report stood out: patterns only become chaos when no one claims responsibility for the pieces. In the aftermath, the story of Grand Rapids 2011 was not told as a mass shooting or an anomaly. It became a case study, a forensic example taught in behavioral analysis training sessions, a model for interagency failure and response. The victims' names were read at academic conferences, legislative hearings, and policy panels not as a headline, but as a point of origin for necessary reform. Years later, at a community forum, a moderator posed the final question: what could have changed the outcome? A former lead investigator on the case answered without pause: accountability, not just for the perpetrator, for the systems that saw the red flags and moved on. I won't pretend this story was easy to tell. It wasn't, but if you've made it this far, then maybe you understand why it had to be told. What happened in Grand Rapids wasn't just about one man, it was about everything that failed around him. Systems that should have protected, warnings that should have mattered, lives that should have been saved. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: silence is dangerous. We can't afford to ignore red flags, not in our homes, our communities, or in ourselves. So, what do you think? Are we doing enough to protect people from threats that build slowly, quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from or how this story made you feel. And if it struck something in you, subscribe to the channel because stories like this deserve to be remembered, and so do the people behind them.